Y'all can see the clock?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
That was a bit of a drive-by, Jordan.
That was a gentle producing tip. Hello, welcome to Hat Trick. I am Jordan Dyler Coltman. I am joined this week by my brother Braden Dyler Coltman and the ever omnipresent Elliot Tanti. Last week we really blew a lot of smoke up his ass about how smart he was because he had correctly predicted the next coach firing. We won't ask him to do that yet, although I'm sure there are a few coaches in the hot seat that are eagerly waiting to see what's in crystal ball there for Elliot Tanti. But welcome back, boys. We got an interesting show this week. We're going to do a little bit different. In fact, we're not even going to talk about the NHL directly. They may come up in our third topic a little bit, but we're not going to spend too much time on hockey specifically. Instead, we're going to go to a summer sport here in the early weeks of March, but we're going to talk a little bit about the CFL and about the XFL and just about those things in general, and it should be a fun show. First off, how you guys doing? How you feeling this week?
Sports. Yeah, feeling good, ready to go. This is becoming a Sunday tradition that I'm really enjoying.
Well, let's get to it. Okay, topic one this week. So news came this week that the Canadian Football League had begun initial conversations with the newly reanimated XFL in their third rendition, their third iteration. That's the word I was looking for. The third iteration of the XFL. So just to give some clarity here, the XFL originally, of course, started back in the early 2000s by the WWE and Vince McMahon. They played one season to very mediocre sized crowds and very mediocre ratings, and they folded after 1 year. And were not heard of, not seen from for over a decade and a half. And then they were brought back to life after the success of a 30 for 30 documentary. I think that's 100% what excited Vince McMahon, was that he got to make a documentary and he thought to himself, man, I should do this again. And he kind of rode that like he does all hype into a new version of the XFL, which unfortunately found itself coming head smacked straight into a season that was cut off by COVID. So the XFL actually was doing pretty well, ironically, in its first early weeks last year, ratings-wise. It was picking up a little bit of momentum because I think that in the new world of gambling and in the new world of sports and online social media that, of course, didn't exist back then, there was sort of a new appetite for something kind of different. But COVID shut them down, and 4 weeks into the pandemic, they filed for bankruptcy, and the league ceased to exist yet again. Later this summer, in August, a ownership group led by The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, his business partner Danny Garcia, and the Redbirds capital principal Jerry Cardinal, they all stepped up and they bought the XFL from Vince McMahon. So that is the story of the XFL. The CFL, which of course has over 110-year, very pristine tradition here in Canada, 3-down football, wider field, 12 men on the field, very big and deep roots within many communities in this country, struggled. They couldn't get the game to be played during COVID. They are in a new sort of period of trying to figure out what's next, and that's what our topic is about today. So with that long-winded and overcomplicated beginning, let's start with this, Elliot. What was your initial thoughts when you heard that the CFL and their commissioner had begun conversations with the XFL about the future?
Surprised, but not surprised, I think would be my first interaction. I mean, clearly, even before the pandemic, there was something fundamentally wrong with the CFL in this country. I was looking at some reporting this week. On average, the teams together were losing between $10 and $20 million a year. That's just not sustainable, right? And I think, there needs to be some sort of influx of cash and idea and energy around the CFL, and then COVID only just amplified those sorts of things. So interested and glad to see that there's something moving forward in terms of the long-term sustainability of the league and of the CFL. But the CFL has a fundamental problem in that it is not engaging with a new, younger group of fans. There is a gap between, and the groups of people that are engaged with the CFL are getting older and older and older every year. I mean, I feel like I'm 30 and I grew up with the CFL, but even I have lost touch with the game in the last 5 to 6 years, because it just doesn't appeal to me. I find it's overly focused in Central Canada. I think TSN has sort of dominates sort of every aspect of it. You don't feel like it's Canada's league. You feel like it's TSN's league. So I'm excited that a new ownership group and a merger of different owners coming together might sort of shake things up a little bit, because what's been going on in the CFL with the relationship with Bell Media and TSN has become really stale, and it's led to, frankly, people being less and less engaged with the product. The last thing I'll say on this, and I want to note, is that the problem I think with the CFL right now is that they're not dancing with the one who brung them. They are constantly focused on major areas like Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, where the game just struggles there. They're like the fifth or sixth most popular thing in Toronto. If they continue to invest in these spaces, where is the CFL the most popular? It's in the prairies. It's in the flyover provinces of this country. And that's where they need to be investing resources, because that's where they're losing out. But that was the bread and butter for them for a long time. And I don't know that merger with an XFL is necessarily going to support that thesis, but that's been my feeling for a long time.
Certainly the XFL has definitely been a brand that's a big market brand. Their teams were in Houston,
the Extreme Football League.
Exactly. They so that, for one, I'm sure has got a lot of older fans of the CFL concerned, just in general. And that, unfortunately, is the predominant paying public for the CFL. They have struggled, as you said, to get a younger demographic, but that has definitely been their focus. Braden, as a younger person, do you feel like the CFL is of interest to a younger generation? And do you think that the idea that the XFL could infuse some of that energy and perhaps bring a bit more, I don't know, let's say North American appeal to it out of just the Canadian market?
I mean, my biggest question is what is the partnership really with the XFL? Is it a merger, or is this a partnership of resources? You know, like Elliot was saying, the media are the monopoly that TSN and Bel Air and all of, but that's where their resources are. So there's no other main, I think, funding, no other main sponsors to keep that going. And in terms of its excitement, though, I didn't miss it this year. I didn't miss the fact we didn't have the CFL. I'm not a huge NFL watcher, but I'll definitely climb aboard when it's time to, when there's football going on. I'm going to watch that. And what the NFL has, I think, is a lot more focused on culture. I mean, there's definitely issues there when it comes to the way that the structures are in the NFL, but the excitement of the football game, I think, is a lot more appealing to a generation of young folk like me.
Well, I think you both hit two really key pieces. One, Elliot, being the TSN and this need, the CFL's seeming need to focus on the Toronto market is connected. I mean, TSN's selling a lot of advertising that they want to hit that big demo and hit the Vancouver market and hit the Montreal market. But as you said, there just aren't fan bases for it. Just the demographics of who lives there, and also the bountiful amount of additional competition. The CFL just hasn't been able to compete there. And then the second piece, Braden, I think, especially like you had mentioned with the younger people, I mean, I think that the pandemic did the opposite to the CFL that it did to a lot of sports, which was, in a lot of cases, people missed the sports. They felt like there was something missing there. They wanted NHL hockey back. They wanted NFL football back. They wanted the NBA back. That just wasn't the case with the CFL. I mean, outside of, I'm sure, several households in Saskatchewan where it is a very important part of, your day-to-day sports culture, most of the big cities in this country didn't even notice it was gone. Most of those fans who are casual CFL fans, they probably didn't even notice it was gone. And I don't want to disparage the people for whom the CFL means a lot to them, because I know that there are some of them. There just aren't enough of them for the league to succeed in the way it's structured, and that's the big piece, right? Like any business, if you don't have a large enough audience for the product you are providing, you need to reconsider the product you are providing.
Well, but what's the value add there that the CFL's created in the last 5 or 6 years? The league, even longer, the last decade, the league is stagnant. It's not interesting. They've tried to do different variations and rule changes, and the introduction of more aggressive video review. But really, fundamentally, it's sort of the same sort of old boys club. Even the panel that, that speaks most often, like it's the same people saying the same thing about generally the same teams, by the way. And they like, it's very difficult as a fan to get engaged in a league when your team is not even spoken of during the halftime intermission, or gets a third of the time as the Central Canadian teams do. And I think Edmonton's always overlooked, and similarly with Calgary. And anytime you're playing, the Western Leagues, and so if you're not building or you're not doing anything exciting, then that's going to fall away. And there are those diehards, and they've been there for a long time, but they haven't cultivated any diehards in the last 10 years. Very few, I really think.
So I know we're like close to overtime here, Jordan, but what is the actual, like, are there specifics of what this collaboration is? Like, I don't see how this, especially with a league that has folded twice.
Close to overtime. Close to overtime. We're like 4
I just don't see it helping.
Overtime.
I don't see it helping the CFL, whatever this is.
All right, let's just quickly put a pin in this. Let's pick this up again in topic 2. We'll pivot it in a slightly different direction, but that's topic 1 for today. Topic 2 this week is brought to us by Busy Bee Vegan. Are you feeling hungry? Busy Bee Vegan is a plant-based meal prep service offering pre-made, delicious, and healthy plant-based meals to the Greater Toronto area. Whether you're curious about plant-based vegan eating, looking to improve your overall health and wellness, or simply too busy to cook, Busy Bee is for you. Their plans are focused on eating clean without sacrificing taste and contributing to a healthy planet. They have made it super simple. Choose and order your meals from the multiple plans they offer, and they will deliver your meals in environmentally friendly compostable containers right to your door. You can find them on Instagram at Busy Bee Vegan Meals or on Facebook at Busy Bee Vegan. Go check out a small local business in Toronto and save the hassle of COVID grocery shopping and cooking. Let the Busy Bees feed you buzz-worthy meals. Okay, so topic 2, we're going to pick up kind of where we were because this is a bigger conversation, and we'd sort of acknowledged that it might be. I want to just pivot us in a slightly different direction. So we've talked a lot about how the CFL is broken. It doesn't seem to be building an audience with younger people, and that's a dangerous place to be when your older demographic is doing what everyone does, which is get older. And I think the hard thing the CFL is facing is that one of the things the CFL hung its hat on for a very long time was the idea that it was a league with this rich history and rich tradition. But we are entering a new age of tradition being questioned, and looking at the traditions we all hold in our culture, whether it's sports or whether it's education or whether it's the history we tell ourselves about the country we live in, and all of those things. We're beginning to enter a more hyper aware space where we are not just questioning, but reevaluating, and also maybe for the very first time listening to voices for whom we hadn't listened as a society, about things. And so that's one of the big pieces here to this story, because one of the biggest stories coming out of the CFL, certainly in our sort of world, was the name change in Edmonton. And that, I think, it may now be able to be looked back as a bellwether of the beginning of the next phase of the CFL. What is the future of the CFL? What is the next? What is next? So let's start there. We talked a little bit about what isn't working. When we look forward to what this merger or partnership or whatever it may be, whether it's simply the two leagues want to at least be in conversation to grow the sport of football, if I were speaking from the sports PR perspective, whatever that relationship is, what is next? What does the CFL need to do to solve some of the problems we had in the first one? And are we already starting to see the beginnings of that? For example, the name change. Do we feel like the way the name change has been carried out has been successful, or is it just another sign that they're just always struggling to move forward? Maybe we'll start with Braden. What are your impressions on sort of what's next for the CFL, especially in Edmonton?
Honestly, whatever they decide to do, I probably won't give too much attention to. I don't know. I mean, I don't.
So they've lost you. As a fan, they've lost you.
You're right. They've lost me. I mean,
is that fair?
I would say that's fair. I mean, I was excited with the idea that they finally got around to the idea of changing their name with with all of the arduous process that took and is still taking.
Yeah,
you
still
know,
kicking and screaming and being dragged there.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what's next? One of the issues I have, I guess, are these community-led ownership groups, because they like we said in the last topic, they seem to be stuck in a way of doing things. Any idea of changing, 3 down to 4 down, I just don't see that flying. I don't think that the way that the CFL is set up right now, that they're open to that kind of change, and they're willing to go and do the necessary. What they'll probably do is they'll do a poll somewhere and say all of these people felt and thought this, and then they'll say, oh, and we're going to use that input into the changes and the things we're going to do, and 5 years are going to go by and nothing's going to happen.
So Elliot, what like is change is drastic change necessary, or can the CFL somehow scrape together surviving on what it's been doing?
Well, I think that what they have been doing is scraping together what they can to get to this point. No, I think that you're going to need something drastic, and it makes me think, like, I don't know that Randy Ambrosie is the commissioner that is going to make the sweeping changes necessary, despite this engagement with the XFL. I mean, I think it's interesting that they're engaged with the XFL. We haven't talked about how any of us feel about there actually being success in a potential merger. I mean, you've got major issues around just the game itself, 4 downs versus 3 sides of fields, those sorts of things. But also, like, the XFL is designed to be played when the NFL is not being played. And that would mean a fundamental change to the CFL schedule in order for that to be the place as well, too. So I'm just like, this is not as bold as maybe it seems, because I just don't know that there's nothing. Maybe they're looking at more of a resource sharing thing, and I just want to note that. What I would do if I was commissioner tomorrow, the first thing I would do is to look long and hard at my relationship with TSN and think about if there wasn't a way to spark some more competition for my TV money in the next contract. And
the players would get paid more too, right?
Well, you'd see players being played more. You could invent some sort of system where you've got you got a Thursday nighter that's on CBC, a Friday nighter that's on Sportsnet, and then 2 Sunday night games on TSN. I know Jordan's shaking his head like he wouldn't do it.
They're not going to touch it. There's no value in it for them right now. There's no value in it. I mean, that's the irony is TSN has poured as much effort and as much money into it as they have because they lost the NHL deal. That's as simple as that. This is the only thing that TSN has.
But they bought the Hockey Night in Canada song.
But I think what's happened, Jordan, a lot of the impact and why the CFL is struggling is because there's a lack of competition for resources and for the CFL. I think that the TSN has become it made the league too insulated. It's too reliant on that media company, and I would be looking for ways to diversify my revenue as soon as possible, because what's happening right now is simply not working.
Well, and I think
that would be my start.
That's and you're right, because the irony being, I would also, like, just as plays devil's advocate for a second, I think TSN has tried to push the CFL occasionally into new places. We all remember the fiasco with miking coaches and miking players and trying to be more modern in their broadcast, and the CFL and the players of the CFL being, as is common with football personnel, very conservative and very concerned about how it would affect the outcome. Now, the truth is, the XFL has always, in both versions of itself, been the opposite of that. And honestly, any league in the United States that has even attempted to compete with the NFL has done so by being the renegade outsider rebel league that is doing something different. The XFL brought the wired camera, the sky cam to football. And 2 years after the XFL introduced it, it was standard in NFL games. They've been the innovator. And I think that is something that the CFL could be looking to in that partnership, to say, if you can bring money, which is, like Elliot said, the missing competitive part about this. There is a lack of resources. If the XFL can bring money by whether it's a merger or we're like a 2-tiered league system, something, whatever that relationship is, if they can bring a little bit of reinvigorated energy and money into whatever the CFL product is, that is the only way they build forward, because the CFL is broken in that sense. I remember talking with you guys, 2 years ago when we first had the conversation about the name, and just talking about why the CFL was broken. I mean, Elliot brought up Vancouver. I can tell you right now, this goes all the way down to how teams are run. So when you go to buy tickets to a BC Lions game, the only tickets that are affordable to, let's say, a casual or like once a season kind of fan, right? A new fan, a father and his children, or a mother and her kids, and somebody who's not going to go buy season tickets but might go see one game and enjoy the game enough, or have their kids enjoy the game enough to build an audience, build a fan base. The only tickets they can afford are in the end zone, right?
Yeah.
And that is not a way to
the
watch
game.
football if you've never watched football. They don't
Well, that's
open
not
up the second bowl because they don't want the stadium to look empty. Why are you selling the end zone? Sell between the 20-yard line and the 20-yard line in the lower bowl and the upper bowl, and make it
Fill
like
it
a high school stadium where you just have fans on the side, but at least then they're watching the game in a way that they're able to understand it and enjoy it. And that goes to the broadcast side of it too. This game needs to be reintroduced to a new group of fans. Lose some of the stodgy, old-fashioned stuff. Guess what? The fans who are of that generation that care, they will put up with a little bit of the other stuff if you can mix it and put it all together. If the product gets better, they won't care.
Yeah.
But if the product gets worse and worse and worse, and you can't grow an audience, you're dead. You're dead.
Yeah. And that seems to be what the XFL's focus has been, is the entertainment side, right? It seems to be more entertainment than football. And that I mean, seemingly has brought a fan base. And so, yeah, like you're saying, like if that is what the merge is, or some sort of collaboration there to be able to bring more fans, more resource, you know, if they had games playing in a lot of those states markets, be able to watch it. But I just don't see the way in which the rules are right now. The game isn't fun to watch for me.
And focus resources where people like the game. Winnipeg, Edmonton, Saskatchewan. That's where you need to focus these resources, not the big markets where you're just not going to compete. They don't have the profit to be able to compete with any of these other ones.
All right, we'll leave it there. That's topic 2. Topic 3 this week is brought to us by The Hunger Moon, an evening of short plays. The Ordinary Productions, in association with Presentation House Theatre's Creative Hub Co-op, presents The Hunger Moon. The Hunger Moon is an evening of 4 unique one-act plays from writers across North America. Over the course of 90 minutes, virtual audiences will confront characters working to regain control of their narratives, exploring the joy and importance of storytelling and how these stories connect us. Featuring a cast of 6 intergenerational actors safely following COVID protocols. There are 2 opportunities to see this production, March 20th and 21st. And the 4 plays featured are The Barely Wives Club by Sarah Segal-Lazar, Hashtag Jones by Olivia Matthews, Too Close to the Sun by Cullen Burnett, and Old Wives' Tale by John Burser. Tickets are available on the Presentation House Theatre's website. That's phttheater.org. All right, back to the show. Okay, so topic 3 this week, we wanted to just take a brief moment to reflect on the year that has been. We're just a few days past what is sort of considered the turning point in sort of the story of COVID, and especially when it relates to sports. Now, obviously, it goes without saying that the biggest story about COVID is the loss of life, and there is a huge loss of life that must be acknowledged all over the world, in North America, Canada especially, the United States especially, but Canada as well, and all of those lives that were lost and the families that affected. That is the first and most important thing to acknowledge about COVID-19. The second part is how many people have put their lives on the line to take care of people, and then somewhere down that list, quite a ways down that list, you know, are how other things that we called normal have been affected. And I think everyone has spent some time over the last 12 months reevaluating and considering what the new normal might be, or how their normal has been affected. And obviously, one of the biggest things that was affected was the way we are entertained, and sports is one of those things. This is a sports podcast. That's what we're going to focus on. So March 11th is sort of considered to be that I don't know, that the anniversary moment date. Of course, March 10th being Braden's birthday. Happy birthday, Braden. We won't dwell too long on that, but
we'll do March a full 11th, segment on that next week.
That's right. March 11th last year is known as the Rudy Gobert game. The beginning of the end, the night that the NBA sort of came to a stop, the NHL stopped the next day. And from that point on, the sports world shifted and changed, and we didn't see a lot of professional sports for several months, and then when they came back they were all different. So we wanted to spend some time just reviewing that, looking back at what this year has been, and sort of the successes and failures from our perspective of how probably mostly we'll focus on the big leagues, but just sort of how the league has played out. So when you think back, Braden, to last year about this time, obviously the Oilers were in a playoff push and the Raptors were playing well. The teams you cheered for were all getting ready for the playoffs, and then it all sort of stopped. What do you remember? How do you think that last spring sort of affected the way you think about sports?
You know what team suffered the most? My
No.
fantasy team. I was in first place going into the quarterfinals or whatever week later, and it all came crashing down. Out goes my money. Out goes my hope of winning fantasy league. I don't know. I remember that night though, March 11th. We were out at a show for my birthday. We were celebrating, and at intermission, Mom leans over the table. She goes, "The NBA canceled." Now, this is somebody who, wouldn't necessarily talk sports to me. And she goes, "The NBA's canceled." What are you talking about? This must be some Beaverton or joke article. And I'm reading it. And sure enough, after that game, after that night that the NBA decided to do that, it seems like everything started to shut down. And it was a hard, dark few months of without hockey, without baseball, without basketball. Well, I think baseball's tried to pick it up again. It was hard. I gotta say, it was really hard. I'm a huge sports fan, and I get up every day, and my day is kind of dependent on what games are going on. I'm a big fan of watching games, and that was really difficult to kind of. Sounds ridiculous, but it was really difficult to not have sports all the time.
Yeah. So in the early days there, Elliot, what were your thoughts or perspective on how it all sort of played out in the early stages of COVID?
I had a pretty good idea something major was going to happen pretty quick. I'll never forget. I think it was either March 10th or March 11th, whatever day. The last Oilers game, they lost 4-2 to Winnipeg, and I remember I was watching the game, but I had something else going on, and I made a point of sitting down and watching the game because I said out loud to my fiance, I don't know if this is going to be the last time I get to watch hockey in a while, I think. And it seemed really sort of alarmist at the time. And I think even Ale was kind of like, really, dude? Like, and then sure enough, 5 months goes by. And I think, Brayden, it's interesting you're very invested in sports. It's a big part of your life. And it was interesting listening to talk radio and sports radio every in the weeks and months to follow the shutdown, where like these guys were like doing anything to just keep people engaged and like doing fantasy like cartoon drafts and things like that. And here in Edmonton, the 1260 guys, and I think it really hit home for me just how many people are invested in some sort of professional sports in some way or another. And hockey's my choice, but like it was everything and everyone, and we were all sort of feeling the same thing and in the same boat, just regardless of what your sport was.
Yeah. So then we get sports back in different forms, as Braden talked about. Baseball tried to just sort of plow ahead a little bit haphazardly, and obviously that had mixed results, as some teams played half the number of games as other teams. But then we obviously had the two leagues that sort of were at the forefront of figuring out what the next could be, both the NBA and the NHL, who are often in lockstep on a lot of sort of the bigger conversations, probably because they share arenas and they have some partnerships built through that. But they both did a bubble, and I think all three of us, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like all three of us felt like their bubbles were pretty successful. You didn't have large numbers, if any, cases once the bubbles were secured, and that was a great thing. And then obviously they moved into the next season. So now that we're just past the halfway point of both of those two seasons, the NBA and the NHL. Obviously the NFL sort of plowed ahead too. Maybe we should touch on the NFL too, but
already got.
How do you think will they get through? Will both of these teams look back at the end of this whole year and feel like they did the right thing? Do you think the NHL maybe specifically?
Yeah, I think that they were able to proceed in the best and most cautious way possible. Like you said, I think baseball was very haphazard, and even once some of the teams had outbreaks, they didn't seem to care or change anything. And I mean, the thing that I'm still a bit nervous and curious about is fans returning. It's great to hear and see that people are getting vaccinated and stuff like that, but it's still a ways away from, I think, returning to a sense of normalcy. And the one thing that
packing stadiums in the South.
Yeah, that's true. The one thing that I have, I'm starting to wear and get a little tired of is it's seeing the same teams over and over. Like, I mean, I love beating Ottawa 7 times, but after a while, you're like, okay, where, I'd love to see Arizona or Colorado or see what some of those other teams match up during the season. And almost all those teams that we don't see in the division, we won't see at all. So it's fascinating. It's definitely fascinating this year with the changes.
I always feel it's very interesting. The one thing I'll just, end on here is just every commissioner of all of the major leagues has said the same thing, and they've been committed to awarding their championship. And that's sort of their main and end goal. And I think that that's an interesting thing to think about, the value of awarding your championship and doing that once a year. There seems to be, that's like a guiding principle, and it's consistent. Even the Women's Hockey League, they said the same thing. Like, that was one of the things that drove them to that bubble process and the new version of it now too. From them, although it way straight through the NFL, everyone has been pretty consistent about that, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Cultural piece.
Well, and I think it's also exposed that there are a few different key pieces that go through the process for every one of these sports. So obviously the first and foremost priority for all of them is making money. That has been exposed as a huge piece. And sometimes that's sort of like the dirty secret that just the leagues kind of got away with never talking about. But I mean, it's pretty obvious why the NBA had an all-star game, and it's pretty obvious why, the NFL just sort of said, screw it, we'll let a garbage man play quarterback for the Broncos. We must have this game played. And they just sort of plowed ahead. But then the second piece I think that has changed, or maybe has been exposed and maybe this is a good thing moving forward, is it does feel like there has been a slightly new appreciation or respect for the role that players' own health and well-being has taken, especially in the NBA. That's a league where there has been a much bigger conversation about like mental health and player fatigue and all of those things that was never dealt with overtly. And I think there's value in that. So hopefully, as we move back into some form of normalcy, as Braden says, probably we're looking at a fall where we're going to see more traditional NHL and NBA schedules, and the NFL is going to look pretty much like it did before, whether every stadium's full or not. Hopefully there are some positives and some growth that can come out of this whole year for each of these teams. That's how I would evaluate it. So with that, I will say thank you to both of you for joining me for yet another great and interesting conversation. And this is Hat-Trick. Hat-Trick is a member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. It's produced every week by Jordan Dowler-Coltman and Braden Dowler-Coltman. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.
One person says this, one person says is, and the other person says Hat-Trick.
Okay, ready?
Yeah. This
is
gotta do it again.
Hat-Trick.
Trick.
All right. I have to go now.